Madison High School at that time was undergoing a teacher transition. World War II had ended 17 years ago, which included the Korean War. I had a substitute teacher in the 7th and 8th grade who fought in the Spanish-American War in 1898. So we go back. Everyone had lived through the Depression, World War II, Korea, and the social, cultural impact was still strong and a major factor in how people conducted themselves. A young person always addressed an adult as Mr., Mrs., or Miss. There were no first names. That was unheard of. And if your parent thought you were misbehaving, the belt usually came out pretty quickly. So, the Madison Press, you had the Madison Press, we had the Painesville Telegraph, the Cleveland Plain Dealer. We had the radio station in Cleveland, and they were just beginning the TV stations in Cleveland. And it was interesting to watch the evolution of TV in Madison during the 50s. If you had a TV, you had to put up a big outdoor antenna, and of course, we had the rabbit ears. I'm sure some of you remember the rabbit ears. And of course, with the rabbit ears came the tinfoil, which you had to wrap the rabbit ears in order to improve your reception. So that was quite an effort. So while we had teachers from World War II and the Korean War, a new group were coming in, and that included, of course, David. David became the Key Club advisor. The Key Club was basically the high school version of the Kiwanis Club. And because he was relatively close to us in age and had the personality fit, he was quickly accepted by us. The relationship was further cemented by his invitation to all of us to stop by his house in North Madison and have some snacks after the meetings. Being always hungry boys at that age, everyone piled in, and Shirley was always there to greet us. She always had popcorn, homemade chocolate chip cookies, and Pepsi. Hence, on the table in the back, you're wondering, okay, what are those chocolate chip cookies and Pepsi and popcorn doing? That's why they're there. And I see in the back, you've got a popcorn machine that's going strong. So Shirley and I were just talking about how many tons of popcorn we probably ate and cookies she made and gallons of Pepsi we drank. And it was a lot. So they always had their house open to us. Somebody had an issue with their parents, which was typically, the situation. Dave and Shirley were always the go-to. They were people you could sit down and talk to. And they would listen, and they would give advice, but what their approach was really to talk you through it and help you come to your own conclusion as to right, wrong, whatever was going on within the family. So, at that time, Dave Jr., yes, was still crawling around dragging his diaper. And in 1960, Dan was born. So usually twice a month, Dave and Shirley would bring out the popcorn and cookies. About 2 months before Dave passed on, I had called and talked to both of them, and I told them I was going to try and make it out here this summer. And Shirley and I agreed we were both going to make her famous chocolate chip cookies. Over the many intervening years, whenever I would visit, Shirley would always had the cookies ready for me when I came in. So the tradition still stands. The Key Club was, in fact, what really began Dave's interest and efforts in community service. The Key Club was a service organization, and to that end, Dave was instrumental in leading and guiding us in the process. It also opened up a network of people in Madison that he might never have encountered or worked with. At our second meeting of the Key Club, he asked what we wanted to do for a project. Many of us lived in North Madison and rode the school bus. The bus always passed this house on the right side, where the current post office is now located. An older woman lived there with some cats and her flowers outside, but the house was total tar paper, roof, siding, everything. From what I remember, hang on here, she probably had a wood-burning stove to heat the house at that time. So we asked if there was something we could do to help her, thinking in terms of repairing the house. So Dave went to work. He talked to people around town, see if anything could be done. What he came back with was that she was almost blind due to cataracts, and it would cost what it would cost to get her eyes, fixed. If I remember, I think it was just under $1,000, which of course at that time was a lot of money. Dave said he thought if we could raise a portion of the money, other groups would be willing to donate the rest. So we did bottle collections, and we were paid a nickel a bottle, for refunds, and we collected up to $200. And Dave managed to raise the rest. While there was no guarantee the operation would be a success, Dave and others convinced her to have the operation, which was done by a doc in Painesville. It was successful. She regained a lot of her lost sight. And about a year later, several volunteers from Madison and North Madison went in and rebuilt her home so it was safe to live in and better withstand the winters. In the 1960-61 school year, the village council decided Madison needed a community center, which is now the city hall. At that time, it was a community center, so to start with the new school year, we would meet after school, weekends, help clear the site of rocks, brush, anything in between. When construction started, we were often the gophers. The final project I and my classmates were involved with was the YMCA. The only Y was the one in Painesville. And usually 2 or 3 times a year, the school would take us, load us up in a bus and take the boys into the Y to go swimming. I'm sure they did it for the girls too. What was interesting, we had to swim nude because some of the boys didn't have and couldn't afford swimsuits at that time. This was really the first time I had ever been in a swimming pool. I spent most of my time swimming in Lake Erie, like a lot of the kids here. So once again, we did fundraisers, helped clear the construction site, and participated in a total community effort to build the Y. It took a couple of years, but of course, Madison now has a YMCA. All through these projects, Dave expanded his network as it became integral to many of these community efforts. In the 1962-63 school year, I went to Bowling Green, and Dave and Shirley introduced Doug to the world. Dave continued to be involved in the community affairs, contributing his time and efforts as a seasoned teacher, became more involved with the teachers and their efforts to ensure the students of Madison continued to get a great education. The class of '62 had several notable students that moved on. Ardith Ashley became a successful psychologist in New York City. Jim Haydock, who some of you may or may not have known, earned his doctorate in music and taught out on the East Coast and at the University in Lincoln, Nebraska. My brother's class of '65, whom Dave also taught, my brother graduated that class. My brother went to the Air Force Academy, became a career pilot, left the Air Force, had a very successful business career, and when he was in the Air Force, he earned his PhD and became a tenured professor at Embry-Riddle, which was and is the foremost aeronautical school in the world. You all know Tony DeBevick. I was out at Tony's last night, and the winery he built basically from his parents' vineyard. I remember when Tony was coming up with this idea and he was talking about it, and I remember his parents kind of looking, okay, do we really want to do this? Obviously they did, and they've been very successful at it. The one you may not know was George Mavko. In the 10th grade, he built an atomic clock, went on to become one of the leading nuclear physicists. The government considered him so valuable, he and his family had 24-hour security detail for several decades. Dave, of course, had them as students. This is the level of education that Dave and Mr. Webb and the other teachers of Madison brought to the table. They were very successful. The classes going, I can only speak of the classes going through 1965, from 1960 to 1965, but the students that came out of those classes had a great level of education, and it allowed them, obviously, to move on and be very successful in their efforts. On a lighter note, my senior year, Mike Beam, Dave McElwee, yes, Mike Beam, Beam Funeral Home, Dave McElwee, and I decided we were going to go to a burlesque show in Cleveland. And we convinced Mike's sister to write a note for each of us. So we went to Cleveland, and of course we had to get back, when school was letting out, so we could hop a bus or jump in our cars and, be home when we were expected to be home. 2 days later, Al Barr, the principal at the time, upon reviewing the notes, reached out to our parents. And you can imagine what happened, which meant we were all grounded for a week. In other words, no car. And I share this story because it was a high school tradition that the last day of school, Al Barr took the men to Geneva on the Lake Theater for drinks and a burlesque show. Carol, do you remember that? I watched Dave become frustrated with teaching and the shifts in education. Dave, during the course of his active teaching career, impacted the lives of hundreds of students, directly or indirectly. He continued to be a force in Madison's educational system for many years as a school board member and as a Lake County School Board member. Dave, like many teachers, touched and impacted lives not only in the classroom, but in the hallways and in the community. The men teachers were required to wear a suit and tie Monday through Thursday, could wear a sport coat and tie on Friday. Ladies were required to wear a dress Monday through Thursday. They could wear a skirt and a blouse on Friday. Many times during the winter, when it would snow during the day after school, we and the teachers would go out in the front yard of the high school and have snowball fights. We'd chase them, they'd chase us, until everybody was covered and half frozen. I don't think that happens today. I'm not sure why. Dave, as we know, left teaching and went into insurance, which provided a better income than teaching, but yet fulfilled his need to help people. When he and Mr. Webb decided to form the environmental control, he and Shirley told me about it when I stopped by one evening. I wasn't convinced Shirley was totally sold on the idea, but they had done their homework and decided there was a need in the community. At that time, most people had a burn barrel in the backyard for trash. Then we had the galvanized 33-gallon tin cans for trash, which could be picked up, or you could take the trash to a yard fill Madison had set up. My comment to Dave and Shirley about this new venture was, are you really going to take on the Cleveland Mob Syndicate? The mob syndicates across the country pretty much controlled trash collection. I lived in Chicago. Waste management that you know today, of course, was formed and run by the mob for years. I was glad to hear when Dave called and said they were out and he was going back into insurance with Nationwide. In 1970, I returned from Vietnam. We quickly reconnected. As ex-military and Vietnam vet, getting a job was not easy. Somebody told me about an ice cream stand that was for sale. I talked to Dave and Shirley about it, and their response was, everyone likes ice cream. Thus, the Shake Shack was born. Darren Foote was also born. In 1982, I had bought a DeLorean, and I had to go over to Notre Dame to meet some people for business. So I decided to drive from Chicago over to Notre Dame, and I stopped, of course, in Madison to see Dave and Shirley and the family. Well, of course, Darren raised his hand. Can I have a ride? So off we went. During the course of my life, there have been several major developments that have had a significant impact on my life and millions, if not billions, of others. The advent of the personal computer, the cell phone, the internet, and GPS systems. Today it's AI. It has already had a significant impact and will have quantum leaps going forward. It has also had some unforeseen negative effects whereby high school kids and college students date chatbots and have relations with them versus dating and talking to a real person. Teachers have stood the test of time. They still talk to students, interact with them on a human level. While many are maligned for their injection of personal and political and progressive beliefs in the classroom, I still believe there are many, many teachers that take their responsibilities seriously, work hard at helping students become educated and a better person for it. In Madison, we were required to take 2 years of Latin, and having taken that course for 2 years has stood me in good stead my entire life. No, I don't speak Latin, but it certainly helps in terms of understanding our language and a lot of the things that go on around us. My one last note, our senior year in high school, the last week was prank week. So half a dozen of us got our pickups, went out to the yard waste site and filled them with old washing machines. Not like what you know today. These machines had the hand wringer and the big tub for washing and scrubbing clothes. We proceeded to deposit the machines in the front yards of numerous teachers, including David and Shirley. Well, guess what? The next morning, we were going out to school, and the washing machines were in our front yards. Yes. And of course, the parents had a last laugh on us, too. Going into school that day, most of the teachers had lined up the halls and were teasing us about our prank. Dave and Shirley were a unique team, and we are blessed that they chose to share their lives with us. He had an immeasurable impact on thousands of students and teachers over the years that are now productive citizens. Dave will always be remembered in the Madison educational community for the insight, strength, compassion he brought to the students and his continuing efforts to ensure that they received the best education possible. Thank you. I promise not to do a face plant.
Well, that's okay. I might follow you.
Oh. Yeah, I think so.
As Doug said earlier, we're going to have our honorary sister, Carol, come up and speak. Carol?
I appreciate so much being asked to just share a few thoughts about Dave Foote, and it's almost impossible for me to say the words Dave Foote. He was always, always Mr. Foote to me and Mrs. Foote. It's only been probably within the last 10 years that I've been able to get the words Dave and Shirley Foote to come out of my mouth because, like Mr. Materna said, I was raised in an era where everyone older than you was Mr. or Mrs. So he was always Mr. Foote to me, but he was so much more than Mr. Foote. Dave was like my second father. Dave and Shirley were truly my second parents, and their sons were like my other brothers. We were really one big family that did life together. I don't know any other way to explain it other than we did life together. I don't think that two men could have been closer than my dad and Dave Foote were. They were like brothers, probably a lot because they were both only sons, only children, and so they had a unique bond as being only children. But they were always like brothers, and my mom and Shirley were the best of friends. And like I said, I was the honorary sister, the pesky girl that was hanging around with the cool guys. But it was wonderful. We had a really unique relationship, and I've always thought of them as my second family, my extended family, because I didn't have extended family that lived close to us geographically. So they were truly, for my brother and myself, our other family. And, you know, it's impossible in just a few minutes to tell you the ways that Dave and Shirley, I can't talk about Dave without talking about Shirley, about all the ways that they have affected my life personally in good ways. Never a bad experience with the Foote family. It was always, always good. I've known them from as long back as I can remember. The furthest back memories of my life are pretty fuzzy, but I remember the very first memories was when they lived in a mobile home at Mr. Fabian's trailer park. And Dave was just a little kid. I don't even remember if Dan was born at that time. Probably not. And then they moved to North Madison, and we got to know him better and better. And my first really distinct memory of Dave was when I was about 4 years old. And he and my dad at that time were teaching school together. They were both high school teachers, as Mr. Materna said. And for some reason, I think my parents had gone out of town, and so my brother and I were spending the night with Dave and Shirley, which was not an uncommon thing for us. And Dave came home from teaching school, and he came in and he was playing with the boys, and he picked me up. I'm 4 years old. He picked me up and threw me up in the air and caught me. And I was terrified because he was so tall, and I was this little itty-bitty 4-year-old girl, and I was terrified because my dad didn't interact with me in that same way. But Dave was just treating me like one of the kids because to him I was. But I was terrified, but he caught me. And from that point on, truly, I always felt safe with Dave. I always felt loved, secure, safe, comforted in the Foote family. And that was my very first memory of him. And it's just a lifetime of memories beyond that. One of the things I remember best about Dave is he was a fantastic whistler. I don't know if you all experienced that, but we would always know when Dave was coming to our house because you'd hear him coming across the yard. And at least 2 different times in my life, they were our next door neighbors in 2 different locations within Madison, but we were so close. And he'd come over in the morning with a cup of coffee whistling. And I thought, here comes Mr. Foote, and it was good. But he whistled a lot. Dave had so many impacts on me. He taught me how to drive, which was no easy thing, I'm sure. I think he drew the short straw because nobody else in my family had the patience to teach me to drive. It's really not always the best situation to have your own parent teach you to drive. So Dave took on that task, and he taught me to drive, and he decided I was going to learn how to drive a stick shift because we had an old VW Beetle in my family. I think it was probably my brother's car, and part of the deal was if you're going to have that, you got to let your sister drive it. And I didn't know how to drive stick shift. So Dave decided he's going to teach me how to drive stick shift. And he was so patient with me. And so, it was like the comedy routine where you're bumping and stopping and starting and lurching. And then he realized, I think, that words mean nothing to me. I have to have like a visual image of something in order to understand it. So he described to me exactly what the car was doing when you engaged that clutch and how that affected what was the mechanism of the car. From that point on, I could drive a stick shift, and I can drive stick shift to this day because of Dave Foote. Yeah. And I was telling Dave Jr. about a story, and I'll just briefly share this. We ate dinner together a lot. Our families truly were just in each other's lives constantly. One night, Dave came over, and I don't remember who all was there. I know it was my immediate family and Dave. And I think he and my dad must have been going to some kind of business meeting because Dave was all dressed up in his nice suit and tie. And my mom was having spaghetti and salad for dinner. So for some reason, Dave got seated next to me. bad mistake. I was a very awkward kid. Let me just summarize it by saying that. So I grabbed the bottle of Italian dressing, went to shake it, and you guessed it, the top was not on. Went all over Dave in his nice business suit right before they were supposed to go to someplace. I benefited from the fact that I was not the actual daughter, I was the almost daughter, so I didn't incur any wrath whatsoever. He was just, he laughed, probably went home and changed, and it was smooth sailing. But that was definitely the benefit of being like a daughter, but not being actually a daughter. It's always interesting to me how little things that we do in life can affect people in ways that you don't recognize, don't think about, but have a huge impact on people. There are so many examples I could give, but one thing that Dave did, just a simple thing that really set a direction for my life. When I was in 3rd grade, he invited my parents to come to a new church that was being formed in North Madison. It was a church that was meeting in a house at the time because they were building a church building. And my parents had been Southern Baptists. They had come up from North Carolina. There was no congregation that was similar to that in this area. Dave invited them to come to the North Madison Church of Christ, and that wound up being the church I grew up in. And I firmly believe that I would have still been a Christian. I would have still known the Lord and trusted him, apart from going to that particular church. But that experience of growing up in that church affected my entire life, because I wound up going to Johnson Bible College, which is a little Bible college in Tennessee, and met my wonderful husband. So if it wouldn't have been for that simple invitation to go to that church at that time, I probably would have never met and married Jamie. So just a simple thing that happened had a huge impact on the direction of my life. One of my dearest memories of Dave and Shirley, and this is where I told Dave and Dan, I am a world-class weeper, so if I start blubbering, you'll understand. They just meant so much to me and have always meant so much to me. When Jamie and I were pregnant with our first son, about 7.5 months of pregnancy, Jamie lost his job. We were living in Tennessee. He lost his job. We lost insurance coverage because at that time, once you didn't have a job, you didn't have insurance. There was no portability of health care or anything of that sort. We had already paid the obstetrician who was going to deliver our child in Tennessee. We were moving to Northeast Ohio because Jamie was going to be able to work with my dad. We had no insurance. We had absolutely no money. And of course, no new doctor in Ohio would take you on at 7.5 months of pregnancy without giving them some money up front. And I was in a panic. I thought, what in the world am I going to do? And Shirley said, you're going to make a doctor's appointment and you're going to the doctor because you need to go to the doctor. Don't worry about it. So I made the doctor's appointment, and when I got there, Dave and Shirley were there with a $100 bill. And that has stuck with me my whole life, just that quiet, simple generosity of spirit and of their own personal possession to help us out. And, I am so blessed to have known Dave and Shirley and their sons. And I'm so thankful, just as each of you are. You each have stories to tell. And one of the great things about a service like this is that we get to build on each other's memories and help us understand even more about the person that we love, that we're honoring. And so I really appreciate the chance to share these few little memories about Dave. I think that, just in summary, I think that Dave truly laid up his treasure in heaven by investing in people. He always took time for other people. And, he was just so loving and caring, and he lived a God-shaped life. He lived out a living faith that he modeled for all of us. And I just sincerely appreciate that and just wanted to honor him and just, am so thankful that he was in my life and that, the rest of the Foote family is still part of my life.
Thank you, Carol. we continue to celebrate Dad's life today, have my little portion. Being the oldest son, with Dan following 2 years later, we grew up with the inexperienced father. We all know that children do not come with their own manual, so Dad flew by the seat of his pants in raising us. Our first were his first, and in Dan's case, seconds. Dad was not a parent who taught us how to throw a baseball or a football. He didn't teach us how to fish or hunt. He was a father who taught us by example, and he taught us the 3 F's in life: faith, family, and because of where we're at right now and limitations within the English language, flippin' work. Should you ask any one of the 4 of us what our favorite memory of Dad would be, it's a pretty safe bet that it probably involves a work project. And in those work projects, sometimes Dad's frustration would come out and he would yell out for his favorite friend, Sunny Beach. But I don't ever recall meeting Sunny. Is when we aged, we found out we learned something we probably shouldn't have learned at the time. Our father came from a line of workers, and that was instilled in each and every one of us through his example. Many of us are aware that through Rick's talk and Carol's talk that Dad moved here to Northeast Ohio. They moved from North Central Ohio and lived in Jay Fabian's father's mobile home park. I don't remember that, but I have a picture of you and I, Jay, when somewhere in the midst. Yeah, you holding me when I was a baby. But Dad moved here with his first job as a teacher after graduating from OU. So Dad relocated Mom, me, and a mobile home so he could begin his teaching career at Madison local schools. He started out as a driving education teacher before he became the geography teacher. Recently, going through some of his paperwork, I found a pay stub from his first year of teaching, and his gross pay was $1,995, which was hardly enough to support a growing family. So Dad had to find other sources of work. He instructed adults, moonlighting, to get their license as a driver's education teacher. He would sell cars. He would sell real estate when he was not in the school building. For a couple of summers, he actually managed Camp Whitewood down in Windsor, Ohio. Later, as Rick mentioned, he did get frustrated with the teaching profession, and he sought other careers. In 1976, he began his career with Nationwide Insurance until he retired in 2001. And his whole purpose for working was to support his family. Dad had to learn his sense of family through others. The Foote family was dysfunctional. His maternal grandfather was dysfunctional. Dad never knew his paternal grandfather as he passed away 2 months before Dad was born. He didn't even know his maternal grandmother as she had passed 2.5 years before he was born. Dad's sense of family came through his paternal grandmother's side of the family and another family who lived around the corner in Palmyra, Ohio. The Jenkins family, his grandmother's family, consisted of 9 children who were close and most holidays were spent with the Jenkins family. However, they were an older group of people, so he did not have much interaction with younger people. The Lotz family lived in Palmyra, and they consisted of 9 children too. However, there were 2 younger brothers, Dick and Larry, who were closer to Dad's age. Our father saw the fun that this family had, and our father did not realize at that time just what kind of an impact that family was going to have on his life. Dick Lotz, who was closer to Dad's age, was the person who introduced a young, blue-eyed lady by the name of Shirley Harder to Dad. She was the niece of Dick Lotz and eventually became Shirley Foote. The rest is history. We learned through his example, the family is to take care of family. Dad instilled this in each and every one of us. Even at the time of his death, he took care of Mom. Long story short, Dad waited to die until he knew with certainty the condominium that he and Mom owned was going to sell. When told that the condo had sold, we had to speed up the process of getting that condo sold because of his condition, he nodded his head, and about 90 minutes after the deal was complete, he passed away. In his last moments of his life, he took care of Mom. Dad was also a man of faith. He made certain we were in church every Sunday, and by example, he faithfully read his Bible and had a strong prayer life. Many of you are aware of his service through the years at the Geneva Church of Christ, Blue Rock Christian Camp, and in Madison. However, even though he had a strong faith, Dad would still struggle in his latter years with whether if he did enough to earn his place in heaven. And we would, as the sons, point out to him that nowhere in Scripture does it point to this idea that Dad had to earn his way into heaven, reminding him that Christ did this by shedding his own blood to cover our sins. Right before Dad went into surgery back in November of 2024, when he broke his hip, was the last conversation Dad and I had about this very subject. And Dad knew the Scriptures pretty well. And I asked him, I said, Dad, I said, you don't have, or said something, you don't have to earn your way into heaven. I said, what does Psalms 103:12 tell us about our sins? And Dad responded that he removed our sins as far as the east is from the west. And I said, okay, geography teacher, how far away is that? And he says, it can't be measured. Yahweh cast my sins away completely. Yahweh is the name of God. Now, if you spell it in the English language, it's spelled Y-H-W-H. And you may ask yourself, how do you pronounce that word without any vowels? It's very, very easy. You inhale Yah, exhale way. When we're born, we speak the name of God. When we pass, we speak the name of God. On December 17th, 2024, at 2:32 p.m., we heard Dad speak the name of God. Thank you. Dan?
Thanks for hanging in there. I get to do the funeral portion. And I need these. David Ward Foote was born to Morris and Dorothy Mealick Foote on September 15th, 1936, in Columbus, Ohio. He married Shirley Harder Foote in 1957, graduated from Ohio University in '58, the same year as their firstborn. He served and worked as a teacher in the Madison school system. He was an insurance adjuster for State Farm and a regional manager of insurance adjusters for State Farm. Went into business, as you've heard, with his best friend, with Environmental Control Corporation, and then took a role as a real estate agent for almost a little over 30 years with Nationwide. He is survived by his wife Shirley, their 4 sons, their spouses, 11 grandchildren, and 17 grandchildren. And those are the bullet points of Dad's life. To quote one of his favorite early TV shows, Dragnet, those are just the facts, ma'am. So, death, this bookend to birth, expected or not, is never easy, is it? The joy at the start of one's life is usually matched equally by the sorrow of their death. Some of us here today have been forced down the road of tragedy, thrust into the heartbreak of loss through cancer, heart attacks, car wrecks, and other sudden endings. But this is not Dad's story. This is not Dad's end. Today we're here, not out of tragedy, but simply to honor and remember a life well lived and well loved. And yes, we mourn, but we're comforted and encouraged by our faith, as you've already heard, and the hope that we find in Jesus' words. The 2 shortest verses in the Bible are John 11:35, which is Jesus wept. The second one is 1 Thessalonians 5:16, which is rejoice always. These 2 brief verses point to the faith and trust that we have in a good God. These 2 sentences, merely 4 words, speak to Jesus' eternal nature and his omnipresence, where he straddles earthly death and heavenly joy, both at the same time. In these 4 words, Jesus wept and rejoice always, we can find comfort in our loss. Because the 2 words Jesus wept, Jesus spoke those. It speaks to his love for us when we lose our loved ones. He cried. He mourned. He grieved the loss of his friend Lazarus, even though he knew he was going to call him out of that tomb. And rejoice always, 2 words of encouragement from the Apostle Paul, words that seem to be almost in contrast, in contention with the others. It speaks to the reality of death and grief, and yet in each of these verses, they point to the hope and faith we have in Jesus, the hope and faith that Jesus knows and understands our grief, our doubt, and our questions, and that as we grieve, Jesus shows his love for us by coming alongside and weeping with us and for us. And as Jesus does this, all the while, simultaneously, he rejoices in heaven with those that we've lost. This is the faith that Dad had, a faith in Jesus right up into his last breath. But faith is faith, right? What I mean is this: the writer of Hebrews tells us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance of what we do not see. And here we see that faith is not knowing. It's not knowledge. No, knowledge and knowing come after our last heartbeat, whether we trust Jesus or not. And our faith and our confidence, our hope and our assurance of what we can't see only transforms into knowledge after we die, when all of our faith in Jesus becomes reality and knowledge. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me. And it was this was the very subject that one of the last conversations that Dad and I had, against Mom's wishes, over a cigar. And it was this conversation discussing the fragile confidence we have, this assurance of a life after death, hoping for an eternal life with Jesus. The faith and hope of the writer of Hebrews 11 talks about is just that. It's faith and hope. And so you've already heard a common theme here today is Dad and Mom's work ethic. Dad grew up on a farm and learned the joy and dignity of hard work. For years I've said this to so many people. My brothers and I grew up in a home where hard work was the currency of respect. And I was bankrupt. Growing up, I was much more interested in laying around the house, drawing funny pictures and watching old movies after school and reading my Mad magazines. For the better part of my life, up until high school, I treated work like a disease or a bad neighbor, something to be avoided. And I know this, that Dad would be very disappointed if I didn't share the utility room story, or what he called over the last 30 plus years, the night we became friends. So I was in 8th grade. We were building the house on Ford Road, and we were doing a lot of the work ourselves, the painting, the insulation, and one of the things we had to do, we had to tile the utility room. And one night, Dad came to me, and he said, come on, let's get in the car, we're going to go tile the utility room. And I did. I went out there, and I went to go get in the back seat. And Dad said, no, come sit up front. And I said, where are Dave and Doug? Darren was still too little. Where are Dave and Doug? They're not coming, it's just you and me. And I think it's the first time that Dad and I did something by ourselves. That's part of being the middle child, right? And I was like, I don't have my buffers. I'm going to spend the night getting my butt chewed. And so we went to the utility room, the boxes of tiles and the adhesive, and my job was to butter the tiles, and then he put them in place. And he just started asking me questions like, how was your school day? And for the life of me, I wish I could remember the story I told him, but I don't. And maybe there's probably a reason to that. But I told him a story of something that happened at school, and I said something funny, and he laughed. And it wasn't when you're a kid, when your parents were kind of patronizing you and placating you, and like they laugh kind of, out of politeness. No, Dad laughed. Genuinely laughed. He laughed so hard he fell back on his haunches and just leaned up against the wall and laughed. And I'd never experienced that before. And it was like a drug. I sought that. And there was something in this combination of working and connecting that became a huge part of my life with him. And I sought that like a treasure because Dad loved to work, and he loved the easy camaraderie of men through work. Each of us, his sons, were mentored by him, through this in practice, not words. I will speak for myself. Watching his comfort and ease with men at church and through every one of his career changes, the teaching, State Farm, working with Mr. Webb, and Nationwide, each brought a similar example of Dad's relationship with hard work and the camaraderie of men when you get involved in this. This world of men where work and relation were of utmost importance. And as Dad grew in his faith, his circle of friendships grew. To me, Blue Rock Christian Camp seems to be a big catalyst. It started with Dad and Mr. Webb and Mr. Brunsman. They're the ones that, if I remember right, purchased the property, and the three of them initiated the build-out of that camp. After it was built, there then came the Friday night steak fries at the men's retreat, where the four of us were enlisted into helping, enlisted in the same way we're enlisted to do anything else Dad was doing. Come on, we're going to fill in the blank. Dad was a creator and a builder. He loved building things. Some turned out better than others. Seriously, like here. He was the general contractor who oversaw the construction of the first part of Geneva Church of Christ and this. He was a builder, His homemade stereo, the lopsided record player made from a stereo kit and builder's grade plywood, that's a different story. But the greatest impact Dad had on me was the way he built relationships, and friendships. He innately understood the power and accountability of the company of men. As Dad moved through life from his 20s and 30s and beyond, he surrounded himself with good men, men who liked to work, men who liked to laugh, men who loved their families and loved Jesus. The men he surrounded himself in turn impacted me, especially Mr. Webb and Mr. Brunsman. It's the greatest lesson I learned growing up in David Foote's home, the power and accountability of the company of men. Because of Dad, I have and continue to surround myself with good men, men who love to work and love to laugh and love their families and love Jesus. It's the reason I moved to Colorado to oversee men's ministry for Flatirons. And it's fitting that we hold this memorial here. The four of us all agreed this is the only place we could do it. The building of the Geneva Church of Christ and this edition are probably Dad's crowning achievement as a builder, because he was a builder, and so is Jesus. Jesus told his disciples nearing the end of his life, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that. I would have told you so." And so as we look at this, one of the things that I thought about when Doug called me that Tuesday to tell me that Dad died, I thought, now Dad knew. His faith in Jesus was now knowledge. And I long for that day, don't you? And one day, and that day seems to be nearer than ever before, we do have the insurance, his family, we have the assurance that the same fragile confidence that Dad had, the same faith and hope that he had, that one day, for all those who trust in Jesus, that faith and hope will transform into the reality of knowing Jesus face to face. Dad led each of us to build on that same foundation, the foundation that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes unto him except through him, through Jesus. And we live with the assurance that one day our faith will become knowledge, and that we will see Jesus. And who knows, maybe there's a utility room up there that Dad and I can tile together. So I'm going to pray, and then the other two get to tell their stories. God, thank you so much for the gift of life, for the gift of Dad, for the way that he impacted everyone in this room and beyond. We thank you that your promise is true, and our faith and our hope and our assurance is that he is with you, and one day we will be too. And we thank you and lift this up in Jesus' name. Amen.
For those of you who might not know, I'm Doug. I was Dad's favorite son. What are y'all laughing at? If you knew Dad, you would know that is totally not true. All of us were his favorite sons, and what an honor just to get up here and just talk about him briefly. So my dad grew up a poor farm boy in central Ohio and dreamed of becoming something different than every other male Foote before him, and he didn't want to be a farmer. He had bigger hopes and dreams, and he graduated high school at age 17 and wanted to do what none of his predecessors had the opportunity to do. He wanted to get a college education. And he played the trumpet in high school and dreamed of playing in the marching band in college at the Rose Bowl. And he completed his application, sent it off, received acceptance to start college in the fall of 1954. That fall, my grandparents loaded the car up with his few possessions and started to make the trek to school. Dad questioned why the car was heading to Athens and not Columbus, and realized he'd made a fatal error in his application process. He was accepted to Ohio University, not Ohio State University, so Dad would be a Bobcat and not the Buckeye of his dreams. Nonetheless, he received his bachelor's degree and became officially an educated man. He'd acquired his book smarts, and off he went to educate and mold the minds of young high school students. That was just one facet of his intelligence. And if you ever had the pleasure of working on a project with our dad, you would know he had an uncanny horse sense about him. He attributed it to growing up on the farm and having to fix things on your own with whatever materials you had available. Repairs to equipment and such became part of everyday farm life. And Dad believed every mechanical issue could be remedied with these two things: a wire coat hanger and electrical tape. I've witnessed him use those two items in ways they were never intended, but they were highly effective too. If Dad was on the Apollo 13 mission, right, he would have found a way to jerry-rig a coat hanger and electrical tape and save the mission post-haste. The last major project we helped Dad complete was at the house on Ford Road, and the overrun from his neighbor's pond kept washing out part of the road. And Dad figured out a way to remedy the erosion, and Dan and I flew home to help, and the next morning we went to work early. Dad had this old hot water tank that he had saved, and he attached it to his John Deere Gator and devised a way to fill the tank out of the pond so the well wouldn't run dry. That was always Dad's thing. You don't run the well dry. Then we could pressurize the water with an air compressor that he had attached with coat hangers and electrical tape to his Gator in order to provide water so we could mix concrete. And we did, and the whole contraption would have made Rube Goldberg proud, I'm telling you. Those concrete barriers, Kyle and Hannah can attest, still stand, right, today, 15 years later, and due to Dad's creative genius. When he broke his hip and his femur, he provided consultation to his own care and asked why they couldn't fashion a few coat hangers into a brace covered in electrical tape for support to, avoid invasive surgery. I was always fascinated at how my dad could fix anything from cars, tractors, well pumps, bulldozers, you name it, with nothing more than just his horse sense. But the best part of Dad's intelligence to me was the wisdom that he possessed. Different from book smarts and horse smarts, the best way to describe his wisdom is through some of my lived experience. So you just heard from Carol, Dad taught her how to drive. Now I know why he didn't teach us how to drive. Thank you, Carol. I think he had PTSD from all that. So Mom taught us how to drive. And I remember one Saturday morning, we were taking off, she had to do grocery shopping. I got to drive, okay? The experience was a nightmare, to say nothing less, traumatizing. Mom screaming, grabbing the dash, grabbing the door handle. We got home, and Dad was in the garage, and I just got out of the car. Well, how'd it go? And I went in the house, and Mom stayed and chatted. A couple of minutes later, Dad came in, and he's like, how'd it go today? I said, Dad, please, will you please teach me how to drive? I cannot ride with Mom. All she does is scream, yell, grab the dash. He said, oh, son. He said, I got to share something. I've known your mom for over 30 years, and she gets a little excitable when somebody's trying to take her life. How could you not laugh, right? Okay. I go on to say, after our initial 2 first years for all 4 of us, where we each had a car accident, all of us have a stellar driving record, right? We contribute that to Mom, right? And Dad's wisdom not to teach us. After I graduated from high school, I decided I would attend Milligan College like Tom Brunsman and my brother Dan, who followed him. Like any other average 18-year-old male, 14 hours from home, possessing a yet fully developed prefrontal cortex, I enjoyed my college experience. No curfew, no accountability, an unbridled passion to experience life like never before. I was all in. At the end of my freshman year, I had made the dean's list twice, once for academic probation and 2 for disciplinary probation. Some find it hard to believe that you can achieve a 1.1 GPA. I had no problem with that at all. So I headed home for the summer. I had set up this cush job working at a plastic injection molding plant in Painesville. And I would work the midnight shift. And I had this dream. I'd work the midnight shift. Then all day I'd go lay on the shores of Lake Erie, get me a good tan, right? Living the life of Riley. I'd head back to school with a pocket full of cash, nice tan, and whatever my second year had to offer. And I remember I came home on a Thursday night, and after we said our initial pleasantries, Dad said I needed to call that plant and tell them I wasn't going to be able to work for them for the summer. I'm like, what? He said, yeah. He said, I've lined up another job for you for this summer, making more money, and we could use the help with your college expenses. I asked where, and he said a name that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He said he talked to a local small contractor with whom I was more than familiar. I dated his stepdaughter my senior year of high school. He was one of the foulest, most cantankerous individuals I'd met in my short 18 years. In addition, Dad made me contact the old super-duper grocery store where I'd worked all through high school, and I could work there during the evenings. My summer plans washed away in a matter of minutes, and there was no negotiating with Dad on this. He told me I would start Saturday, and I needed to call him Friday to see what time I started. 6 a.m. that Saturday, Dad was at my bunk telling me to get it in gear and get to work at the address that was provided. That was the start of the longest summer of my life. I was initiated by hauling 2 bundles of 50-pound shingles up a tiny, shaky ladder. I weighed 115 pounds myself. I spent the summer roofing countless homes, barns, hanging sheetrock, tearing apart rotten bathrooms, hauling cinder blocks, mixing concrete, cleaning gutters on some of the tallest houses here in Lake County. At night, I rested, stocking shelves in my beloved Super Duper, dreading the next morning. Finally, the summer ended, and I was packing up my car on a Friday night, prepared to make the 14-hour trek back to school to Milligan the next morning, and I was so relieved the summer of torture was over. I got up that morning, showered, said my goodbyes to Mom and Dad and Darren, and I climbed in my Ford Escort, and I'm backing out, and I hear this tap on the window, and it's Dad. And I had to roll down the window. That's when you used to have to roll down the window. He said, son, did you enjoy your summer? I said, Dad, you know I hated this summer and I can't wait to get back to school. He said, well, son, I'm sorry. But you might want to think about that and take things more seriously, or that's the work you will be doing the rest of your life. Enjoy your year. You could have knocked me over with a feather. Dad was not known for his patience, and he had waited a whole summer long to teach me a lesson, right, that I will never forget. I drove down the driveway mad, yet thankful for having a father that wise and that loving to teach me one of the hardest lessons of a lifetime. I often wonder what he's doing in heaven. Is he talking to those who built the Tower of Babel and tell them they should have used these instead of? Or is he lapping up the wisdom of Solomon in order to share it with us on the other side? Dad was 10 foot tall and bulletproof to us, and he always will be. And just wanted to honor him today with those few stories. Thank you.
Good news, I'm last. I always have been. In October of 1974, singer-songwriter Harry Chapin released his only #1 song. By 1976, Cats in the Cradle was leading Billboard's charts. In the same year, Dad had started work with Nationwide Insurance. Life was busy, the new job was a hassle, there were bills to pay, and Cats in the Cradle had already started to haunt him. Being born the son of his old age, he was 34, and what my brothers considered the first grandchild, I experienced our father differently. I recall spending my days playing in his office while he and Mom worked to get his agency off the ground. Many nights, Dad would disappear after dinner, leaving for sales appointments. But I also recall standing in the front doorway, whistling into the dark, and hearing his tired whistle back. Being 6 years old, I was really too young to understand what men do in financial desperation. Well, by the end of 1982, Dad was a grandpa, for real. Thanks, Tessa. What's that? Well, I wanted to give it back to you. So, you know, he had these three nearly off the payroll. He'd experienced some success in business and afforded himself a couple of toys. The first was a stereo, not the kit, that had the ability to stack records and just play for hours. It was really kind of the first iPod shuffle. The second was a 1939 Ford 9N. He refurbished it with his childhood friend, Bob Scott. Dad and I bonded over that tractor. My favorite place was behind him, perched on the rear fender. In the crisp evenings of northern Ohio, we would head into the back fields, sickle bar mower attached, to set the world right. Dad laid waste to the cares of his days, to the hum of a Ford 9N. Now, occasionally, that sickle bar mower would snap a tooth, and we would head back to the garage. You've heard what the garage experience is like. But when working with Dad, I had only one of two jobs. I either fetched the tools as needed, or I shined the flashlight where he was looking, not where you were. All right? But, you know, as he pounded the rivets that held that new tooth in place, I pictured him pounding the head of whatever client frustrated him the most. Evidently, his name was Beach. But returning to those half-lit fields, Dad would relive his farm boy days, and he would find peace. And turning to me with a smile, he'd pat me on the leg, and we would simply be. After we cleaned up for bed, Dad would cue up records on that stereo, and Mom, Dad, and I would drift away in music. Right? Verities and Boulder Dash would eventually drop, and Harry would begin to sing. He would begin to lament about silver spoons and boys in blue and the man in the moon. I wondered, you know, what went through Dad's mind listening to that song? Was it a song of regret to him? Did he ruminate on lost memories or missed opportunities with his own father? Did he wish he'd done things differently with his sons now moved away? You see, Dad associated music with family members. We each had a theme song. Mom's was Honey by Bobby Goldsboro. Cats in the Cradle was Dave's song. But, I believe that Cats in the Cradle was actually all of our song. Each stanza of that song represents the father that we knew. Dave learned fierce independence. Dan learned resourcefulness. Having a young father trying to figure out life. Doug, he received the wisdom of a proud father who wanted to sit for a while. Me, I knew a patient, more empathetic man who, having been around the block already 3 more times, knew that this too shall pass. He was my strongest supporter and always fought on my behalf in my lackluster school days. And he was always there to encourage me beyond my doubts when asking for advice about music. And so I also witnessed him as a man longing for connection and realizing the passing of time and carrying the heart of that only child and just wanting to simply be. The last verse of Cats in the Cradle was one that always troubled me when I was younger. I pictured a man in his old age having only passed his brokenness on to his son. Now, I really see things differently. Looking at these men, I see that our Father has passed on to us a great heritage. Each learned the value of hard work, doing what was needed to provide, as you heard, up to his last hour. We learned to be men of conviction and generosity. We learned that marriage was hard, but commitment was more than a word. That family is all we have in this life, and faith is all we have in the next. Now, my dad was by no means a perfect man, and if you ask him and pressed, he may actually admit it. But even in that, I see that each of us, in our own way, has grown up just like him. His boys are just like him, and I think we're the better for it. In the end, it's my hope that that is what occurred to Dad. One last thing I think Dad would have liked shared today, as has been. He may have wrestled with grace, but he believed in salvation through Jesus Christ and devoted his life to serving him. If you haven't already, examine the hope in Jesus. Knock on that door. See that he's good and put your trust in him. Because of this, Dad believed we will see each other again. And I believe it too. Right now, I picture him waiting, asking, "When are you coming home, sons?" Wife, daughter, grandkids, great-grandkids, sisters, brothers, friends. I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know we're going to have a good time then.
child arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for I knew it. And as he grew, he'd say, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad, come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today, I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay, and he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. Said, I'm gonna be like him, yeah, you know I'm gonna be like him. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, the little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. Well, he came from college just the other day. So much like a man, I just had to say, son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while? He shook his head and he said with a smile, what I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later, can I have them, please? And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. You know we'll have a good time then. I've long since retired, my son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I can find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids are the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad. We're gonna have a good time then.
wasn't much more than a baby. I thought he was a bear, the way my daddy carried me around. They said I learned to walk while holding on